Welcome back to the channel, everyone. That is right, we are talking all about Space Marine 3 today. With the game officially being greenlit last year, we now have some new information that could be influencing what is going to be coming in that game, especially after the news of the new campaign narrative for the tabletop, and a brand new edition that's coming this year as well. So, all that and more, but let's dive right in. So once again, our hero Titus will make a return as the protagonist for Space Marine 3, but where will his journey lead us in the new video game? To understand that, we have to first take a step back and look at the ending events of Space Marine 2, as well as what has transpired between then and the current setting of Warhammer 40k. So after our heroes, Galadriel, Chiron, and Titus take down Imra, the Chaos Sorcerer of the Thousand Suns, Titus then departs from the Second Company to go off on a journey with Marneus Calgar off to a secret mission. But to understand where he went and what unfolded after that, you would have had to seen Secret Level on Amazon. So Secret Level opens up to Sergeant Mataris getting a briefing coming through to him. And if you don't know who he is actually the mentor and father figure of Titus himself. So Sergeant Mataris is a veteran of the First Company, and has been given a very difficult mission that is probably going to lead in his death. But he's actually been tasked with recruiting Lieutenant Titus to go alongside of him. Now, why Titus? Well, perhaps it is because he is heavily resistant to chaos, and you'll see that as they jump into here, they have to take down a huge chaotic element on the planet, and things are not going to go the way as planned. So Titus and his crew will be facing down with an actual demon in Warhammer 40k, and unfortunately, Sergeant Mataris is very gravely wounded and the other two blade guards are actually killed. But being the badass that he is, Titus is able to resist the forces of chaos and kill the demon himself. But the chaos forces are not fully defeated, and it is just Titus and a wounded Mataris left on the planet as hordes of, chaos cultists come running down the hill towards them. And we are left off with Titus running full-fledged at them, and that's how it ends on a cliffhanger. And then we don't see until the next bit of lore that happens what has become of Sergeant Mataris and Titus. So fast forward a little bit to present day in the setting, and we see that now Lieutenant Titus is being made Captain Titus of the Second Company once more. That is right, that is a title that he previously held, then lost after the ending of Space Marine 1 because he was, being doubted by certain inquisitors and, a certain chaplain now in Space Marine 2. But that aside, we see him becoming the captain of the Second. But friends, yes, you might be asking what happened to Akron and his buddies from the Second Company, because Akron was the captain during the time of Space Marine 2. Well, unfortunately, we haven't seen it in like an animation or anything like that, but we did get lore that Akron and Chiron and some of the others actually fell in a great battle against the Gene Stealer cult. Now, the Gene Stealers are kind of like a sub-faction of the Tyranids themselves, and it was a big old battle, and they fought to the very end and very heroically, but I guess they had to make room for Titus coming back in, so sorry, Akron, but eventually, hopefully, we'll get an animation that shows their heroic death. So with all of that out of the way, we can now talk about what is probably going to be the setting for Space Marine 3, and that is going to be the reclamation of the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Now, if you don't know what that is, Ultramar is a giant sector of space that is held by, the Primarch Guilliman and all of the Ultramarines held planets. But during not only the Horus Heresy and the Plague Wars and some other subsequent battles, a lot of those planets were lost to warfare, and now Titus is being tasked with an insurmountable task of trying to reclaim many of these worlds that have been lost. But honestly, this is no easy feat.
The Primarch Reborn demands the impossible. He commands us to reconquer the 500 worlds of Ultramar. In the 10,000 years between his death and rebirth, how many worlds have been scoured by the archenemy, devoured by the monsters of the hive mind, sacrificed on the altar of Exterminatus? He is a demigod out of time, fighting for a golden age that can never dawn again.
So you heard it from Titus himself. Now, he is very skeptical that they'll be able to be successful, but nonetheless, he is going to try his best with his Ultramarines to do the task set forth by him by the Primarch Rabute Gilliman. But why do I think that the 500 Worlds is going to be the next setting for Space Marine 3? Well, if we look at Space Marine 2, it tied into 10th edition, and 10th edition followed the Leviathan fleet from the Tyranids, invading our space and attacking Avarax and all the other different planets that are in the sector, and having our Ultramarines and other Space Marines, have to go face off against them. So if we're kind of continuing that thread, we see a new narrative change that's going to be coming to 11th edition, and that is going to be, the reclamation of the 500 Worlds. Now, in those 500 Worlds, we're going to see a couple of other forces that are at play. So, no longer Tyranids, although they could possibly make a return for Space Marine 3. But if we're going to take a look at the lore and some of the new models, we can speculate on what we're going to be up against for Space Marine 3. We need to first take a look at this excerpt of lore that we have for the upcoming 500 Worlds campaign, and it talks about Necrons and Chaos, and honestly, there's a lot to unravel here. So the excerpt first talks about the Necrosaur. Now, the Necrosaur is not your run-of-the-mill Necron, no. He is ambitious and has a goal about bringing the return of the Nightbringer. Now, the Nightbringer is a shard of the Catan, and honestly, looks like the Grim Reaper, and he is a badass. If you don't know about the Catan and their lore, you'd probably want to go look it up because it's very interesting. They're kind of like these primordial old gods before everything really truly existed in Warhammer. But that is for a different type of video. Go check that out on your own. But honestly, if this actually comes to fruition, this will be a really big threat for not only Titus, but the rest of the Imperium. So probably up to us to go, take down the Necrosaur and see if we can put an end to his plans. But not only that, it's mentioning the Maelstrom, friends. Now, the Maelstrom is another sector of space that is pretty close to the Ultramar sector. And if you know anything about the Maelstrom sector, that's actually home to a bunch of renegade Space Marines that then turned into Chaos Space Marines. That's right, the Maelstrom is home to the Red Corsairs, previously known as the Astral Claws and led by Huron Blackheart, who previously fell in battle during a fight of succession from the Imperium in the Badab Civil War, but was put down and crushed and was stitched back together by his Tech Marines, and he is out for vengeance, and we do actually have, a trailer about his return, so let's quickly look at that.
I was the loyal soldier. I fought your wars across 100 worlds. My brothers bled and died to protect the fragile borders of your empire. But your Imperium, in its ignorance, betrayed me. You called me traitor, renegade, heretic. Well, so be it.
So I love how you can hear the corruption building up in Huron's voice at the end, and obviously he was turned that way by the forces of Chaos themselves. And friends, because again, the Maelstrom is so close to Ultramar, and he is a pirate by nature, I think that he's going to be going into the 500 Worlds and harassing the Warden and the Captain of the Second, Titus, on his mission of reclamation of the 500 Worlds. But also because Huron wants to go up against the figureheads of the Imperium themselves. And who that is right now? Well, that is Rabute Gilliman, who's leading the Imperium, and Ultramar is his home. So what better setting for, Huron to get his vengeance than to attack the homeworlds directly? But also, if we're following the thread of having a Xenos warrior faction and a Chaos faction within Space Marine 2, again, I think that is a pretty strong case for having the Necrons and the Red Corsairs both getting new lore within the 500 Worlds, new models within the 500 Worlds, and also following the thread of, hey, every single Chaos force has had a sorcerer behind them to kind of lead their narrative. Well, that wouldn't be Huron, but we do actually have a pretty good representative of that within the Red Corsairs, and I think that might be the other antagonist that we get for the Chaos Force. And who might that be? Well, I'm thinking that might be Garland Soul Eater of the Red Corsairs. He is their most powerful psyker/sorcerer now, and honestly, he's always been by Huron's side, and probably the only one that could help kind of push a major threat towards the narrative of Space Marine 3, so maybe he's the next, sorcerer that we face off against. But it does not stop there with the theory crafting of who else we might be up against within Space Marine 3. I think that the Death Guard of the Chaos Forces might also be returning for Space Marine 3. And the reason being is that, hey, within the 500 worlds themselves was the setting of the Plague Wars. You know, Mortarion, the former Primarch and brother of Guilliman, led his Nurgle forces over into Ultramar, corrupting many of the planets and fighting these major battles and majorly wounding Robuta Guilliman himself within those Plague Wars. Now, the forces of chaos were able to be contained and pushed back in many areas, but the lingering effects of Nurgle still exist on several of the planets, and if, you know, Titus and the Ultramarines are going to be going off and reclaiming some of the planets, well, they are definitely going to be running into the forces of Nurgle himself. So I think that the Death Guard have a very good chance of returning, friends. So to wrap things up, I think that our main two antagonists are going to be the Red Corsairs and the Necrons as the main dominant force, but I think we should have several battles against the Death Guard themselves and the forces of Nurgle, maybe even some, you know, demons of Nurgle appearing on the battlefield, because we're always fighting demons in all the Space Marine games. But again, friends, that is all theory crafting, but I think it aligns perfectly for how the progression of the tabletop narrative and the overall story of Warhammer 40k is shaping, and how they like to tie things into the video games themselves. But if you enjoyed the very top level lore drop, as well as, you know, the speculation onto Space Marine 3, please be sure to like, subscribe, and, you know, hype the video because it helps, and we will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.